We're gonna get started on time, which is remarkable, and I applaud all of you for coming early. I know many are still signing up downstairs and will be joining us, but I want to just thank everybody for what will be, no doubt, a remarkable day here at the Robert Jackson Center. Programs entitled Attica, Legal Perspectives and Legacy, and we have a really phenomenal lineup of speakers, and Tori Ergang will be introducing them as we go through the program. A few housekeeping matters. Exits, if you actually need them, are there, and there. There are a variety of restrooms on this floor, downstairs, and in the house area. Also, I want to alert everybody of a few opportunities that are forthcoming. One is, and this is not on anything that's out there, but Juanita Jackson is a rock star in our area, and she works in a world of which we just dream about. However, she wanted to share with anybody who's interested, there is the National Capital Lawyers Auxiliary. It's dinner in Washington, and that involves the spouses of the justices of the Supreme Court of the United States. I know some of us from this area, some of them, including my wife and Floss Cass, among others, have participated. So if you're interested, it's October 10th. They are going down, and Juanita Jackson in the front row would be the person to contact. A couple of upcoming Jackson Center moments which are not likely to be replicated. One is on the 24th at noon, we are having the foremost World War II historian, Gerhard Weinberg, here. He'll be speaking about his life and his times and his work, and that'll be at noon on September 24th. By the way, there are brochures on the table out there. Then for especially the lawyers, but also the public, will be a great interest, on October 25th, the first time ever, the Appellate Division, 4th Department is going to have oral arguments, live, honest-to-God oral arguments here. Right behind that screen is a bench that's been put together for 5 of the justices who will be here. And that starts at 10 o'clock, and we have a couple of our local members who will be arguing that day. It'll be a hoot, and no doubt it will be packed. So that's October 25th, 2018. And after that, in the afternoon, there'll be a CLE with the justices where they'll be explaining what just happened, and also we get a chance to interview them, what life was like when they were actually a regular, ordinary lawyer. That's the 25th, and if that isn't enough, the next day, the 26th, we are having 3 of the federal district court judges here, Judge Geraci, who's the chief judge, Judge Elizabeth Wolford, Judge Villardo, will be here to talk about their world, and we'll have a couple of special guests to be announced as well, and that's October 26th, and there'll be CLE connected to that. So think about this. You're going to get 4 hours of CLE credit today, 3 on the 25th, 3 on the 26th of October, just about completes a year. And this will be all free, open to the public, and we welcome you for that. This doesn't happen here without the several sponsors who support this programming and support the opportunity, and so I would encourage you to meet those. Many of them are here today. They're downstairs. They've got tables. Meet them, greet them, thank them, but also at the same time support them. And I just want to call out a few of them. Some of them are really shy and over in the corner there. Let me just list them, and they're in your book alphabetically. Allegheny College, Shannon McConnell, who will be here shortly. AXA Financial, Peter Trethan. Peter, if you want to wave, so everybody knows where you are. Axiom, which is the Mark Olson family. The Jamestown Bar Association, Todd Tranum, Kristen Yaw, and many of you, all of you who are here, thank you very much. The Greater Chautauqua Region State Planning Council, of which Eddie Sundquist, Eddie will be here shortly. Rogers Land Surveying, Chris Rogers and Carol Rogers and that whole group. Andriozzi, Bluestein, Margaret Fickner. Margaret, thank you very much. Key Private Banking, which Ron Sutton, Kevin Miller, Jim Igluski, Nina Gustafson, thank you for participating in a major way here today. The Chautauqua Region Community Foundation, Tori Ergang and June Dietrich, and wherever Tori is, she'll be introducing the speakers. Heritage Ministries, Lisa Haglin will be here shortly. Kessel Construction, Artone, which had a big article in the paper today dealing with their most recent contracts, the Calamari family. Digital, James Parker. Faulkner Printing with Jim Roach. By the way, the Jamestown Bar Association established a fund a few years ago through the Chautauqua Region Community Foundation honoring Judge Gerasi. And this is the Judge Gerasi lecture today, and there'll be, obviously, we've got Pulitzer Prize winners, we've got award-winning reporters, the FBI will be here, all in honor of Judge Gerasi, who will also be here shortly. Speaking of his honor, in his honor, Lynn Hartley. The Chautauqua Abstract Company, John Ortendahl. John, thank you for all your continuing support. And Safety Compliance with Rick Shield. So let's give them all a big round of applause. Two others, which I'll mention later, but we have in-kind support through Elegant Edibles and Vicki McGraw, and the Chautauqua Sports Hall of Fame will provide pictures because our last guest today is Don Luce of the Buffalo Sabres Hall of Fame. And for those, there's going to be pictures which will be autographable. So with that, that's the program. But most importantly, I got to introduce Mary Keating of Phillips Lytle. Mary Keating is the pathway for everybody to get CLE credits. Look in your book, which she kindly put together for us, and there's a sheet of paper. I know you know that, but she's the person right there. So it doesn't happen without Mary Keating. Finally, the Jackson Center and Sherry Shutter, Marion Beckering, Dee Kathman, have all done a marvelous job just putting this all together and making this a reality. So to introduce the first part of the program, I'm going to call up Tori Ergang, the Executive Director of the Chautauqua Region Community Foundation.
Good morning. We are excited for what's ahead today. Thank you for joining us for this continuing legal education seminar. Throughout 2018 at the Chautauqua Region Community Foundation, we've been celebrating 40 years of enriching the quality of life in our region. And we've been highlighting stories, and we've been having special events, and we've talked with many of you. It's been a wonderful year. And the foundation has had tremendous success over those 40 years. One of those successful moments is helping to coordinate these continuing legal education seminars and helping to get them started. So we're proud to be a small part of this convening and learning event. Today's program draws our attention to an event that was pivotal in American history, and it occurred only a short distance from here. So for some here today, we learned about the Attica Uprising from history books. And for others, it was an event that we followed through the newspaper and TV news coverage for days. Interestingly enough, our panel in a little while will allow us to experience both the historical perspective and the news perspective firsthand, and consider the impact and relevance of the Attica prison riot in 2018. And to get things started and to get the education part of your program started, we welcome Ms. Amanda Lowe. She will share with us on the topic of diversity, inclusion, and the elimination of bias, something that is extremely relevant today. She is a partner in Phillips Lytle, where she has tremendous experience in civil litigation matters. She's a member of the firm's employment practice team, where she assists both public and private employers on a range of today's most challenging workplace issues. She earned her undergraduate and law degrees from the State University of Buffalo, State University of New York at Buffalo, after first graduating from Faulkner Central School and Jamestown Community College, which we're very proud to have Amanda with us today. Immediately following Amanda's remarks, we'll welcome Dr. Heather Ann Thompson, and she will share with us from her considerable expertise on the history of and current crises of mass incarceration. Dr. Thompson's book, Blood in the Water, The Attica Prison Uprising of 1971 and Its Legacy, was recognized in 2017 with both a Bancroft Award and a Pulitzer Prize for History. And I did some research on the Bancroft Award. It's extremely prestigious in its own right. Dr. Thompson received degrees from both the University of Michigan and Princeton and is currently serving as a professor of history, Afro-American and African studies at the University of Michigan. I can tell you this day promises to be fascinating and eye-opening with great discussion, and we're excited to dive right in. So we'll welcome Amanda.
Thank you, Tori, for that excellent introduction. I have to say, right before we came in today, I met my new friend, Tori, who is a graduate of Southwestern High School. So we introduced each other as rivals in terms of high schools, except for Southwestern always won every game. But we can still call it a rivalry, right, Tori? And I thank you so much to the Community Foundation. They're a pivotal part of our society. I myself have been a recipient of scholarships through there, and they just do so much in our community. And thank you so much for your organization and your work in sponsoring today's event. I'd be remiss if I did not thank our fearless leader, Greg Peterson, for putting this together. He always puts together an excellent event. And then, of course, Mary Keating, who is the backbone of our firm and who does all of the work. So thank you, Mary, as usual, right? So let's get into today's topic. Starting this year, the New York CLE Board is requiring that all experienced attorneys, meaning someone who's been out of law school for more than 2 years, complete a diversity training. So I'm sure you're all here, just to hear me speak, but you're also getting your required training for a 2-year period. Is that right, Mary? 2-year period. So you're good for 2 years after today. But in addition to it being a required training for attorneys, this topic is becoming increasingly more important in today's conversation, whether it's locally, whether it's statewide, or nationally. And I think a good example of that was the Starbucks debacle, right? So we all heard about this during the spring of this year, where there were 2 African-American men that were arrested in Philadelphia at a Starbucks while they were waiting for a third gentleman to arrive, and the manager said, well, they hadn't bought any coffee, and I think the records ended up showing that they had been there for 2 minutes without buying coffee because they were waiting for someone, which is crazy if you think about it that way. I mean, I've been in a store before without buying something for 2 minutes, and no one's arrested me. So as a result of that and another incident in LA, Starbucks took an extreme measure and shut down 8,000 of its U.S. stores in May of this year to conduct racial bias training. It's interesting, they only shut down United States stores. They didn't do it across the world. But in 2018, did you think that we would still need racial bias training? Do you think that we would need sexual harassment training? You would think by 2018, we would have evolved as a society that we wouldn't necessarily need these trainings, but it appears that we do. And at least these trainings would help, I would imagine, staff and employees from, I don't know, not calling the police on people that don't need to have the police called on them. But does anyone in this room think that Starbucks racial bias training is going to completely erase the problem, 100%? Raise your hand if you think it's going to be 100% successful. I don't see anybody's hands, which is the correct answer. So if we don't expect it to 100% eliminate the problem, why do bias training at all? Anybody? This is the interactive part. Here we go. Education is the key to change, and that there's no truer words than that. Getting this conversation started, and sometimes it's a sticky conversation. You don't know what you can talk about, what's publicly, politically correct to say anymore. But part of this training is getting people talking, getting people exploring where they come from, where other individuals come from, and you start breaking down these barriers. In addition to education, sometimes it's legally required. The lawyers in the room here are aware that there's Title VII issues, there's the human rights law issues. If we have any college or universities in the audience, there's Title IX issues. So we like to train up our employees because we want to avoid liability, but we also want a better workforce that's more understanding, more cohesive, and work together better. So, you think that I'd be good at technology, but thank you for teaching this to me. So what are we going to cover today? Because people come from a lot of different backgrounds, a lot of different education. You would assume that things are common sense when they're not, right? Because common sense is not common. So we're going to talk about the sources of bias and how to identify specifically implicit bias. And we're going to go over what that is. I'm going to give you examples of implicit bias in the workplace mainly. We can talk about some in a social setting, but I'm going to mainly focus on the workforce in an employment setting. And then let's talk about some best practices for eliminating and preventing discrimination and bias. And by that, we're going to help make people feel included. You hear this part, inclusion. What does that mean? You know, does that mean, oh, we can just hire a bunch of women and minorities and therefore we're inclusive? No, we have to have an inclusive society, inclusive workforce. So let's talk about the best ways to do that. So before we start with what is implicit bias, let's talk about explicit bias. And this is obviously pretty simple. Treating people differently based on the status of a protected category or status. So whether it's race, gender, religion, whatever it is, explicit bias is pretty, you see it, you know it, right? Okay. In terms of implicit bias, though, that isn't something that's always apparent. It's going to be something, rather than being neutral, we have a preference for or an aversion to a person or a group of people. Now, this can be based on stereotypes that we associate with that person or a group of people. And we're going to go over some examples of stereotypes, but, you know, stereotypes, you don't know necessarily that you're learning where you're learning them from. And I like to give the example of your crazy uncle at Thanksgiving who had one too many beers while watching like the Detroit Lions, and he just like tells you everything that he feels, right? And it may not be politically correct, but you're listening to it, and again, whether or not you agree or disagree with it, that's having an impact on you, whether you know it or not. That is being processed in the back of your mind, and even if you don't recall that specific event, it's something that your mind remembers without you consciously knowing it. So again, implicit bias is more of an unconscious bias as opposed to you recognize what's going on in your own brain. So what types of biases are implicit? Because again, the thing is with implicit bias, everybody has them. So there's an affinity type of bias, and I'll give you an example in an employment setting. If you're sitting across the table from someone interviewing them, and they talk like you, they went to a similar school like you have similar interests, that's an affinity bias. You may want to hire them because they remind you of yourself. And most people like themselves, which is okay, right? So if I sit across the table from someone, and I did a couple weeks ago, I was interviewing a 1L law student for a 2L summer position, and I thought she was phenomenal. I thought she was great. All her answers were spot on, very well educated, very well spoken, professional, and I'm giving her all these, gold stars on her evaluation. And I said, we have to hire this lady. I really enjoy. I think I would really enjoy working with her. And the person that was interviewing her with me said, well, yeah, because it's a mini Amanda. And I thought, okay, yeah, you're probably right. So, I mean, there is I hadn't recognized that, but, I needed someone else to show me that perspective, that affinity bias that I had. Confirmation bias, we see all the time in the media now with fake news, right? So this is where someone searches out facts to support their opinion or conclusion or bias, and does not consider facts that oppose that opinion or bias or undermine that opinion or bias. They just kind of have these blinders on. These are only the facts I want to look at. I don't care if there's these facts here. That's confirmation bias. halo effect is an interesting concept. That's where you take one little aspect of a person that you like, and then so you assume everything is great, right? So if you see on a resume that a particular student went to a really good college, they went to Williams, they went to Harvard, they went to Yale, they got to be smart, right? Because they don't let just anybody in those schools. So they have to be smart. So they must be a hard worker because they had to get to that school. So they're going to be a good worker for you. That's the halo effect, okay? Where you take this one great aspect of someone and you make this complete rosy picture without even meeting them. The opposite is called the horns effect. If you take one little aspect and then you blow that out of proportion, right? So if you're an Ohio State fan or something, or if you're a Notre Dame fan and then you see a Michigan student, and then you say, I'm not hiring that person. Because you've taken one aspect you don't like about them and blown it out of proportion. Perception bias is more of a subjective bias, so how you selectively see someone versus how maybe other people in the room view that particular person. I like to give the example of I interviewed someone last year, again, very well-educated, very professional, very mature, but the entire time during her interview, all I could listen to is the fact that she had a really funny voice, right? So she kind of talked like this the whole time, and I could not listen to anything else besides her funny voice. So my subjective bias, and I thought about this afterwards, was I was taking this little issue and just, surpassing everything else that she had done. And I was like, we could just communicate by email. It'll be fine, right? It'll be great. The bandwagon bias, again, pretty self-explanatory in terms of it's a group think. Okay, well, Joe says, let's hire this person. Sally says, let's hire this person. Fine, let's hire this person. Or, there's this group consensus without a lot of particular thought put into something, hence jumping on the bandwagon. We see that a lot with the Bills, people jumping on the bandwagon and then jumping off the bandwagon after Sunday's debacle. It didn't take me that long to jump off the bandwagon. So implicit cognition is, again, it's going to be a process that's taking place out of your control, out of your consciousness, out of your direct awareness. So it seems like a strange concept because I can't ask you what your implicit bias is. You won't be able to tell me because it's implicit. If you knew what it was, that's explicit, right? So what are some examples of what an implicit, how does our implicit cognition work? I think a great example is a mental shortcut. We're also going to call them schema. The mental shortcuts are ways that we take all of this information that we're given in life and we distill it down into something. And then our bodies just work on that information and we don't even recognize it. An example of that is today's seminar, right? So you came to today's seminar, you signed in, you got your coffee, you walked up these stairs, you sat in the seats, you faced this way, and you're being quiet and listening to me. I didn't tell you to do any of that. You just knew how to do that, right? How did you know how to do that? Because you've had these experiences in life that when you go to seminars, you go sign in, and then you get your coffee, and you go sit. You don't face that way, you face this way, and you normally are quiet, unless it's a participation thing. And your brains have used all that information and distilled it down and put it into the back of your memory so you know how to act in the future without thinking about it. Because think about if you actually had to break down every individual piece of that, you wouldn't think about anything else. You'd be thinking, okay, now I have to put one foot in front of the other, and now I have to go sit, so I have to bend my legs. There's a lot of, muscle memory. There's a lot of internal instincts that go into this. So an example that I like to use, so I have a 1-year-old daughter, and she, what an example for a mental shortcut for her is we're learning what animals are and the names of different animals and the sounds they make, which she's one. They all sound like lions. It's all roar. Like that's all she can say right now. But we're trying to teach her the dog, and the dog's name is Zoe. So she calls her Oe, and every time she sees a dog, she says Zoe. And we're like, no, that's a dog. Only your dog's name is Zoe. So now she's learning that other dogs are named Dog, and she doesn't need to learn that again. That's her mental shortcut, right? Once she learns it, she doesn't need to learn it again. It's going to always be in the back of her mind. So I know it's kind of a strange example, but that's actually one that the Swiss scientists used in terms of how they learned about mental shortcuts. Was they were learning from children and how they progressed through life. Let's see. So that was mental shortcuts. Incubation is another phenomenon we all encounter. This is where you are focusing on a problem and you can't figure out the solution, right? So you take a break, or you take a nap, or you go run, or you make dinner or something, and you're in the shower one morning, and all of a sudden you have this aha moment, right? The idea about incubation is psychologists are theorizing that time where you aren't consciously thinking about the problem, your brain was continuing to work on the solution, whether you recognized it or not. So that's the aha, is you've been working on it this whole time and you just didn't recognize it. And again, that's by some English psychologists that came up with that one. The Swiss and the English so far. Priming. This is a process where you associate particular images with things or statements, and then just before you carry out a specific task. So if your coworker is talking about his or her latest trip to Thailand, and then later that day you have a craving for Thai food, that's what priming is. So we can see priming here. Can everyone here complete what that word is supposed to be? Go ahead, shout it out. Excellent, very smart group here. Same word, now what is it? Okay, so this is the idea of priming, is you're shown photographs, and for the same word you came up with, or the same space, you came up with two different words because I was showing you images and that primed your memory to come up with a different answer, okay? Okay, so another example of implicit bias, unconscious cognition is stereotypes. I'm not going to go into some of the crazier stereotypes, but I use this as an example, and I don't necessarily believe in all this, but this is an example that happens in the employment setting, is that mothers are considered to be nurturing and caring. So if you have children, you're going to have less time for work responsibilities. And if you don't have children, you're a career woman, so you're less nice. Now, are any of those things true? No. But that's a stereotype, that some people think of when they are hiring women, whether they have children or they don't have children. So this is the fun part of our presentation here today, our implicit association tests. Mary, have we handed these out? Okay, so Mary is going to hand these out. I want everyone just to take one page, okay, and pass it down. What you're also going to need is you're going to need a pen or pencil. So you don't have to write anything down. No one's getting graded on this, okay? But implicit association tests is an attempt to try to study or be aware of your own implicit cognition or bias, okay? Because again, I told you, you can't talk about your implicit bias. You can only talk about your explicit bias. So these implicit association tests are probably the most widely used method that psychologists use to measure the strengths of associations between concepts and outcomes. And the idea is the response is easier for you if there's a stronger association, okay? So as we're passing these out, does everybody have one? Raise your hand if you don't have one piece of paper that has like a graph on it. Okay, great. So let me grab my phone, because I need my phone for this. Okay, so what you have in front of you, oh, thank you. Mary's so great, isn't she? All right, so you're going to have a piece of paper that has a graph on both sides, okay? Because Mary was smart enough to print something on each side, which is great. Because normally we were handing out 2 pieces of paper. I don't know why it took us so long to figure this out. So we're just going to start with the one side, and you'll see a column that says like. You're going to see a bunch of items listed in the middle, and then you see a column that says dislike. What we're going to do is you're going to take your pen or pencil, and don't do it yet. I'll tell you when to go. You're going to mark everything like that's associated with buffalo. Okay, so when you see the word buffalo, you're going to mark like. When you see New England, you're going to mark dislike. Okay, so everything, I'm sorry if you're a Patriots fan or, Red Sox fan. We're just go with me on this one. So anything buffalo, we're going to like. So buffalo, sabers, bisons, I think I put buffalo in there twice, bills. I know you got to like the Bills. I'm really sorry, but we still like them. We're still supporting them, right? At least until week 2. And now we're going to dislike everything that's associated with New England, whether you feel that way or not, okay? And I'm going to give you 10 seconds to do it, and you're going to do as many as you can in 10 seconds, okay? You have no more light. I'm sorry, we have no more light. Apologize. Yeah, you get 100%. If you can't see it, you win. Ready? Okay, let's go. Okay, stop. And that's okay if you didn't finish it, that's fine. Now add up how many you were able to complete. No, on both. If you were able to mark like for Buffalo, dislike for New England, how far did you get down on your sheet? How many did we complete?
Were we supposed to be going back and forth between columns?
Yes. Yes. Okay. Oh yeah. Okay. So just add up how many you have, okay? I don't need to know the answer. Now we're going to flip the paper around, okay? Same grid. This time, every time you see something about buffalo, you're going to dislike it. Okay, you're going to mark dislike. You're going to X dislike. So you see buffalo, you're going to say dislike. New England, you're going to like this time. Everything New England like, everything buffalo dislike. You can do as many as you can in 10 seconds. Go. Okay, stop. So add up how many you were able to complete. And the idea with this association test is that most likely for most people in the Western New York area, it was easier to complete the first side than it was the second, meaning it was more likely that you were able to go through the first side faster. You were able to get more correct in terms of you didn't make a mistake. And the second side should have taken you a little bit longer to process, because if you have a positive affinity for all things buffalo, it's hard to write dislike, okay? And they do these types of tests for a lot of different things. There's a project Implicit that's through Harvard University and the University of Virginia, where they test a number of subjects based on race, gender, religion, sexual orientation, and other demographics. It doesn't necessarily have to be a protected category, but this is supposed to show you that we all have implicit bias, okay? And it's harder for us, it takes us longer to consider something else. It takes us longer to write down that we like Tom Brady, okay, for most people in Buffalo. Myself. I did this association test at work, and we had a couple associates from Boston who were not pleased about this whole test. I said, you live in Buffalo. Now I don't want to hear it. So how does bias work in the workplace setting, and what is the impact? And these are just 3 studies because it's very hard to come up with express data to view how implicit bias works in the employment setting. But three good examples are, there was a study done where at a graduate school where they did, it was about 15 abstracts of scientific papers. And each paper was given a fake male name and a fake female name. Same paper, right? Just two different variations of it. And they were given to about 39 different graduate students to grade and to comment on and to see whether that graduate student wanted to collaborate with the author of that paper. And what the study found was that even though each abstract or paper was identical except for the name on top of it, there was a perception that the papers with the male name on it were given higher marks than the exact same paper with the female names on it. And there was a similar interest to work with the male authors because you could ask to collaborate. Then there was an interest to work with the female authors. Now again, these are all fake names, so they're not collaborating with anyone. So when you have these graduate students evaluating these papers and showing a distinct preference for the papers with the male name on it and wanting to collaborate with them, what gender do you think these graduate students were? Who thinks they were mostly men? Who thinks they were mostly female? You are right. 70% of them were mainly female and still gave the male authors higher marks and were more willing to collaborate with them. So there's some women-on-women crime here. Now, in terms of audition, so in the music setting, there was this report was from 2000, so it's 18 years old, but it showed that when you're looking at actual auditions for philharmonics, orchestras, things like that, where there was a blind audition, meaning that the individual performed behind a screen, so you couldn't tell if they were male or female, so all you had was just to be able to listen to the music that they produced. That increased the probability that a woman would advance from the preliminary round to the next round by 50%. And auditions where behind the screen in general resulted in a 25 to 46% increase in the number of women that were hired just by having that screen there, not being able to know what gender that individual was. So even in the arts, they discriminate a little bit here. Now the third, and I apologize, there's not a ton of data on these points, but the third research project that I came across was conducted by professors at the University of Toronto. And what these researchers did is they created resumes for Black and Asian students, and they sent them out to about 1,600 entry-level jobs in the United States. And again, this is similar to the first study where these are fake resumes, okay? So, and what they would do is they would send a resume that they created for an individual, and then they would scrub a second example of that same resume. So if one would say that the individual was a member of the Black Law Student Society Association, then the scrubbed version would just say they were a member of the Law Student Association. Okay, so they would take out any reference to minority status, female status, things like that. And the resumes, even though they were otherwise identical for these fake people, because again, it's fake, the scrubbed resumes were far more likely to get callbacks. And that held true even though the jobs that they were applying for indicated that the employer wanted, they had a value, they wanted a diverse applicant base. Okay, so they're putting out there, we want to help our diversity statistics. We encourage diverse applicants to apply, and yet these are the same employers that preferred the scrubbed version of the resumes versus the unscrubbed version. So it's pretty eye-opening. in terms of what we're saying we want and what we're subjectively doing in terms of actually hiring people. So let's knock on the law profession a little bit more because the law profession has a ways to go. So again, some of these are older statistics from 2017. About 6.4% of Fortune 500 CEOs were female, and 45% of attorneys in private practice were female, but only 18% are equity partners. Similarly, in terms of a racial disparity, only 3% of attorneys in the largest U.S. law firms are African American, and of that, only 1.9% are partners in those law firms. Similarly, for Hispanic individuals, the numbers are 3.2 and 2.3, as you can see up there. So lawyers have a ways to go in addition to every employer in New York State and throughout the nation, but you would think lawyers, they know the law, they should value diversity, they should be aware of their own biases, and we're not. So again, part of this is opening the conversation and seeing what we can do to make these numbers better. Now, I've given this presentation before, and one of the questions was, well, what should the numbers be? And I said, I can't give you a number. There should be no number that's good enough. What we need to be doing is trying better and actually hiring better, right? That will change the numbers, and the numbers will be what the numbers are. But these are way too low, and this should not be happening in today's society. So what can we do? Now, again, I'm focusing more on employment settings, but we can talk about social settings during the question and answer section. But when I'm talking with employers and they're saying, okay, we really want to work on this, how can we work on this better? There's a few key categories that I like to look at. One is your interview question restrictions. So there are certain things that we just can't ask people on your application, right? Or we can't talk about during your interview. It's usually, things that will get you in trouble or getting a charge for discrimination for failure to hire. But what about those technically okay questions? Like if you get a resume in and there's gaps of employment, right? So again, I'm not talking about New York City. New York City, you can't discriminate based on unemployment status. But the rest of New York State, if you see someone with, say a 7-year gap of employment, what do you think? What do you think they were doing? Do you think they were in prison? Yeah, maybe. My mind goes there too. I don't know why. Not everyone goes to prison, but that's in my mind. We're here talking about Attica today. So, you think they're in prison, or, maybe they just left the industry because they couldn't hack it. Even if you think maybe they're a good fit, you think, oh, they've been out of the business for 7 years, so their contacts are stale, they may not be up to date on whatever your business is, whether it's IT or the law, you think, I just don't like that 7-year gap. And you might find out that there was a 7-year gap because the person was a stay-at-home parent, right? And that's a lot of challenge that stay-at-home parents face when they're trying to re-enter the workforce, is to explain the gap, per se, on their resume when they had a job at home. And I will tell you, again, I had my first child last summer, and I was on maternity leave, and I could not wait to get out of there. Stay-at-home parents deserve a medal. I love my daughter. I need to work. I need to go talk to adults. And so the idea of stay-at-home parents, the skills they acquire are amazing, right? Have you ever tried to negotiate with a toddler? Do you ever win, right? So it's like it's a difficult side. So that shows that person has stamina to stand up to difficult situations, difficult bosses. They have time management skills. They're usually well-skilled at working on a tight budget. I like to say, like, the first 3 months, when your kid's just screaming at you and you don't know what they want, that's a really good workplace setting skill, right? When you have a demanding boss and you don't know what they want, but they want it now, that person has a really good skill set. So, before you just dismiss this gap in resume, consider what the source was. Consider why that occurred. That's going to help us bring a little bit more diversity back into our workforce. Obviously, you're going to want to avoid stereotypical comments and remarks in your interviews. But whether or not it rises to the level of a Title VII violation or human rights discrimination, because again, we don't have to police everything that happens in our workforce, right? Like if everyone rolls their eyes at someone or whatever, standard decorum, we don't necessarily have to police as employers, but sometimes it's a good thing to do because it makes people feel like you care about them. And that when people feel like they're being cared about, they're going to care about you and your business, and they're going to do a better job. Training and education, I feel, is very important. I'm sure many of you are aware, but if not, New York State Department of Labor has come out with new sexual harassment guidelines this year that have to be there has to be a policy adopted by every employer in New York State. You have to train all of your employees by January 1st of this year, or of next year, on these new harassment policies. It has to be an interactive training. You have to adopt a model complaint form. I could talk about this at length because I love talking about sexual harassment stuff, and because I do a lot of the trainings. But if you have questions, you can just go on the Department of Labor website. But that type of training, even though it's mandatory, is also good. It shows your employees you don't tolerate that type of conduct in the workplace. And frankly, if you do tolerate it, you're going to get hit with a lawsuit. So don't tolerate it, follow the law, adopt the policies, and do the trainings, right? And that goes hand in hand with enforcement of anti-discrimination policies. When you get a complaint of discrimination, again, whatever it's based on, whether it's race, gender, religion, whatever, show the complainant that you're taking their complaint seriously. They may not like the outcome of your investigation. They may not think it's the right result. But if you show them that you're doing a fair investigation of their complaint, usually they feel like they've been at least listened to, okay? Again, they're not allowed to dictate the outcome of an investigation, but show them that you're there, show them support, show them that you don't tolerate retaliation, which is what I spend a lot of my time doing, is not firing people because of an actual incident. I fire them because they retaliated, which is stupid. I mean, you could have got away with it, frankly, but then you retaliated against someone, and we don't tolerate retaliation. A couple other best practices are mentor programs, if you have them or are able to do them. We have them at our firm where our associates are paired up with, I believe, a senior associate and a partner that are usually in their area of expertise. So they can come to them with questions they may not want to ask someone who gave them some work, or maybe dumb questions that they don't want to ask somebody else. Or it might be, how do the internal politics work at your employer? Like, who do you talk to? What's that guy's problem? What are, just the ins and outs. Mentor programs, again, show your employees that you value them, that you're investing in them. Work-life balance, I think, is incredibly important if you want to work on a more diverse workforce and keep the people that you want, that you're really looking for. I'll give you an example that there is one study done where 82% of Asian Americans and 34% of Hispanic Americans state that they care for their elderly relatives, and they have a large family obligation in terms of elderly, and we're not talking about kids, elderly relatives, whether it's in their home or they're just the primary caregiver, or they try to be the primary caregiver outside of work. So although they provide more care to family members statistically than other groups, they still felt more guilty about the level of care that they're giving to their relatives versus having to work. So if you do have a work-life balance, it's great for your employees. If you can give them opportunities for flex time, if that works for you, great. If working remotely works for you, great. If you are able to do those policies, you may be getting different people that are interested in working at your particular company. And I like to think of keeping an open mind is always the best way to go about things, but I won't bore you with some of these things, but does anyone remember this whole Laurel versus Yanni thing that was in the news like 3 months ago? Does anyone remember that? Like there's this like little sound bite that people have this dispute about whether the sound bite says Laurel or Yanni, which are two different words. Yeah, you remember that? I think I even have it here. Let me see if I can pull it up. Because I had no idea what the heck they were talking about when someone said this to me at work. I'm like, what does that even mean? Let's see if I can play it for you. Can everyone hear that? Okay, all right. Who heard the word Yanni? Who heard the word Laurel? I'm with you. You're right. I believe you're all right. I would say I did this once before, and I was the only one that heard Laurel. But that, I think, is a great perspective of how we interpret information. Someone told me, oh, it's just how you're, auditory, how you hear things. I'm like, yes and no, but you're also interpreting that information. How can a soundbite like that cause a dispute over what was said? I don't even know if Yanni is a word, but Laurel does not sound like Yanni to me when I say it out loud. But that soundbite has really caused a lot of confusion because everyone perceives it differently. The other example is, I think in the news like a year ago, there was all this debate online about whether a particular dress was blue or white. Again, two different colors. I don't know how that could have been a debate. And you might think, well, the answer was blue. I'm like, actually, the answer is who cares? Like, if it was blue or not. But, that just shows, and then people get really entrenched, in what they believe the answer is, too, right? They're like, no, they definitely said Laurel. Well, now we see in a room full of people heard different words, okay? So you all have your different perspectives. You've all encountered different things. You've been educated differently. You've had different life experiences. And you heard the same thing and heard different words. All right, so just keep an open mind. So when you're talking to people and sometimes the first thing out of their mouth, you look at them, you're like, what? Like, what planet did you come from? Again, sometimes it happens to me at work. I'm trying to keep a more open mind that someone had a different life experience than me, has a different perspective on something. So I'm trying to take a step back, consider what they're saying, even if they're wrong, and just consider it. And maybe I'll explain my perspective. Okay, well, I feel it's this, and tell me why you feel this way. Again, it's supposed to keep us talking about bias, talking about diversity, talking about how to include people and make people feel included and valued. So with that, I'll ask you if you have any questions. Way in the back.
Could you play that recording again? I'd like to try to hear the one that I did not hear.
Okay, certainly. Did you hear the opposite? No. Yeah, I didn't either. But I've heard people have told me, they're like, we really tried to hear the opposite word, and I did hear it. I'm like, I've never heard Yanni out of that, not once.
I heard an N in there. How do you get Laurel with an N?
I hear Laurel.
But there's an N sound.
See, I don't hear that. Oh. Up there, yep. Mm-hmm. That's what I hear.
And then there's the yanny up top. Mm-hmm. And there's actually a site you can go to where you can play around with.
And listen to the different octave? Okay. Interesting. Just in case anyone's bored, but you won't be after, we're going to have some great presentations later, so you have to do it later.
So my relevant question is actually about microaggressions.
Okay.
So that's kind of a buzzword out there.
Mm-hmm.
How do microaggressions fit into this conversation about bias? Do they really matter, or aren't they just small slights?
Yes and no. I mean, there's always going to be small slights. And does everyone understand what we were saying when we were saying microaggressions? You know, sometimes you have a passive-aggressive person. Sometimes you have a microaggression where you see someone react or go after someone a little bit too much. That has an impact on the recipient, right? So whether or not that is legally discriminatory or whatever, that's always going to have an impact on the person that's on the receiving end of a microaggression, and they're going to keep that in their mind forever. It never goes away. Whether you recognize it or not, it does not go away. So I do think it's relevant in terms of what we're talking about in terms of work decorum. Okay, so if you see those types of reactions or conversations, we can, you know, you as a bystander, you can insert yourself in a conversation if you're able to do so. You can talk with the person afterward and talk and say, hey, what was happening over there? You know, because sometimes just talking it out makes it a little better. It doesn't eliminate it, unfortunately.
Can you speak to coded language? Like apparently middle class can be a coded term depending on the audience you're trying to reach, and what kind of coded language to appeal to people's worst views of themselves?
Well, if we're talking about like a job posting or something like that, people, yeah, I mean, you're very right. If you're trying to attract a certain group, you want to be very careful about what your language is. I think there's been studies out there where if you have very strong terms like tenacious and fierce and whatever, they're more masculine type words, and more men actually apply for those jobs than women. When you're looking at self-starter or motivated, that's more of a neutral term, right? I'm trying to think of a different example. So when we talk to people about age discrimination, because age discrimination is very prevalent. So under the New York human rights law, you can it's illegal to discriminate against someone 18 and over. Under the federal law, it's 40 and over. And I see people coming in for whether it's their second or third career, not at my firm, but if they are coming in their second, third career and they're applying for positions and they keep being told they're looking for new, fresh ideas, or you are overly qualified. Those are actually terms people are using to try to avoid being sued for age discrimination. I do not like when people use those terms at all. Like fresh new ideas make, you know, you can't tell me that someone 40, 50, 60, 70 can't come up with a fresh new idea, right? So I tell my employers, I'm like, don't use those terms. If there's other reasons that you're not hiring someone, fine, tell them that. But do not tell them because they're overly qualified for a position. Or because you're just saying, I don't really think you're going to be here in 5 years, right? I think you're going to retire and I want someone that's going to be here longer. And you might be really missing out in terms of a really good hire. Other questions? Are we going to still be required to do, is there a limitation? Unfortunately, no. It's every employer in New York State has to adopt this policy and has to train their employees. And it's even applicable to employers who are normally located outside of New York State who have workers in New York State. Yes, as you've noted, certain regulations sometimes say, okay, if you have under 4 employees, this doesn't apply to you. Not this time. New York State is saying, it's an election year. That's all I can tell you. And it's primary day, guys.
How do they check compliance?
They haven't come up with that yet. In terms of how, like, they're not requiring certifications from every employer yet. They will probably retain the ability to fine someone if they find out after the fact they don't comply. But if you're bidding on state contracts at all, if you're responding to RFPs or whatever, you are going to have to certify on those documents that you are in compliance with these laws.
Well, as long as
Yes, most of it is, they have a model policy that you can adopt basically word for word, right? You just stick your company name in there. They have a model complaint form, again, just put your letterhead on it. This is attorney-client privilege right now, right? Yeah, we're giving up some advice. They also have a training module, like an example with some PowerPoints on their website. I think it's incredibly burdensome. You're not required to use that exact language, but you can use that as a starting point in terms of how you are going to train your employees. It has to be an interactive training. It can be online, but it has to be an interactive training. I prefer in person. So start with what the PowerPoint they have on the DOL's website, and then you can modify it from there as long as you hit the required topics, like what sexual harassment is, how do you fill out a complaint form, blah, 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 whatever else they say, you'll be fine.
Can the training be done individually?
Yes.
So you could establish a procedure whereby every new hire you met with and did it, and
That's an excellent point. So the regulations are going to say we need to train all New York State employees by January 1st on these new policies. And then every new hire after that needs to be trained within 30 days of hire. And then all employees need to be trained annually.
so all employees need to be trained annually, but it could be done one at a time.
It could be, yes. And you have to look at your own company to see what's going to be beneficial for you, because New York State is not paying you to train them. So you are taking on that extra burden of figuring out how to train them, when to train them, what the cost is going to be, and then there's that employee cost where they're not being productive at work because they're being trained, but you are complying with the law. So you have to look at it, what is your individual situation and how can you comply with the law the best. If you have any questions, just give me a call or shoot me an email, and hopefully we can get every employee in New York State trained by the end of the year. It's just a big undertaking. Any other questions, guys? Are you very excited to learn about the Attica case? Yeah, it's going to be really exciting. So if I didn't say this enough, thank you so much for having me here today. Go vote in your primary. And thank you.